Does anyone have any questions? Has anyone had a chance to uh, work on anything Blender related or any kind of photo editing? No. Got it. In 1 second, I'm trying to get the screen loaded here. Okay. So last week we went over uh, some basics in camera, uh, some small information about lighting, texturing, and a few modeling, uh, extra modeling tutorials here. So now we're just gonna kind of build on what we've been learning about. So today is going to be more about we're going to probably dive sorry, dive into a little more information about camera and lighting and about how we light things, how we make things look more realistic, uh, about how light works, about how cameras work and depth of field and that sort of thing. So today we'll concentrate on, and then next week what we'll do is we'll start to actually build out our buildings. We'll bring up trees and start lighting all that stuff, and then we'll start actually making an animation, and we're going to start putting it together. But for now, let's get an idea on how lighting and cameras work. So today, we're just gonna be a little more hyper focused on what we've been doing. So we'll hide all of this, and we're just gonna focus in on one of the cars. I'm not worried about yeah, we're fine with the camera. Clear these keyframes. Let me save this as an actual uh, save this so we can all focus on it by itself. So we've got this car. Now, how do we make it look, a little more realistic? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a floor. More of a turntable sort of thing. So we'll add a cylinder. Let's say we'll add a little more definition, so we'll add 120 segments to it. We're going to scale it up. And then we'll scale it down a little bit. And we're going to bring it down. And what we're doing is we're just setting a scene to kind of show off what it is we're going to be working on. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add just a little bit of detail to our turntable. So again, just some really quick modeling. We'll go into edit mode. We'll select the face here. And we'll inset just a little bit. We'll extrude it down. Inset a little further. And that gives it a little break in the geometry to add a little bit of interest. And we'll extrude it up just a little bit more. And now we have a little line in there to add a little bit of definition. So what we're going to do is we're going to name this polygon floor. What we're going to do is we're going to inverse this selection. And we'll call this the turntable. Find that geometry. So for the floor, we'll get out of this. We're going to give it a little bit of a mirror finish. Let me see what's going on here. we're gonna do is we're gonna have some reflection to it. It's not reflecting for some reason. Let me see. There it goes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to blur that reflection just a little bit. And then for the turntable, we'll just make it a flat color. We're not too worried about uh, adding a lot of definition to it. And then what I'll do is I'll add a plane underneath it. That way we don't have to see the background. We'll bring this down. And let me turn this to the realistic renderer, to the regular renderer first off. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start to play with the lighting, and we're going to start to play with the camera work. So let's just start kind of everything from scratch. So in our shader editor and in our world view, we're going to turn off our world lights. And now what we have is we only have the lights emitting from the vehicle. And we can also turn that off. So if we come over here to our emission, which is our light, and we can turn that off. And from the backlight, we can also turn that off. Now there are three ways we can light a scene. We can light it with an image, as we did here before. We can use actual lights, and we can use actual geometry also. And we're going to kind of touch on all of that. So for the first thing with our lights, we want to be, for a product shot, we want to be focused solely on the car. We're not worried about everything else around it. But let's look at the type of lights that we have to work with. So first off, I'll create a light. And we'll start with, say, here's a point light. I'll bring it up so you can see it. And as you can see, the light's kind of small, doesn't emit a lot of light. But there's a lot of parameters, a lot of things we can do. We can make it brighter. We can increase the size of the light. We can adjust the clipping distance. So lights work on a concept called inverse squared. And what that means is that light only emits for a certain amount of distance. And once after that distance, the light just becomes less and less and less and less until, it doesn't emit anything for you to be able to see. So each of these contains different version of those properties. So with the point light, as you can see, it's a single point light. This green circle around it is the diameter of the hottest part of the light. So as you can see, if I bring it in, the more intense you see that spot. And this is a point light. They all work a little bit differently. So we'll move this off to the side so we can't see anything. We'll create another light. We'll start with the area light. Now, I know I covered a lot of this last time, but I want to make sure we get this down. Lighting is very key in anything that we do. So now you see an area light is a little more square. And you can kind of see how it falls off. It's a little bit softer. And this is what we use for a lot of interiors, a lot of product shots, because it gives off that look and feel. And for the area light, I'm trying to remember if we can scale it in here. Yes, we can, a little bit. These we can actually scale. So when we come in here and we can make it a little more intense, and this kind of gives us a nice, commercial looking highlight where we want to go down the line of the vehicle. Then we can adjust that intensity, and you can see how the intensity is starting to fall off onto the bottom of the floor here. So now let's move this onto the side and we'll start on the spotlight. Spotlights are fast. They work on an older lighting system, but they're very effective. It's good for getting a specific shape, a cone shape. So if you're doing a fall off from a lamp or a headlight like we have headlights like we have on the car, these are very good. So we can adjust this, and you can see the shape that follows. You can see the intensity from the circle. We can adjust the size or the width of the actual light. And you can see it also gives a bit of a soft fall off. And you can always bring that up. And you see this, there's two circles around. You have one which is the outer radius, so that's our fall off from the light. And the inner radius is the intensity of the light. So where that drop off starts is from the inner circle to the outer circle. So if we do our blend size, and you see it's a little more easier to see if I put that light here on the floor. Whereas if I take the blend size and I bring it down and go from sharp to soft using the blend size. And then we have sunlight. Sunlight lights up everything, literally everything. So that's why you don't see a fall off with this. This lights up the entire world that you create. You can fade this also. You can adjust the distance, the intensity, and also you can see how it gives a little bit of a haze. And then we can adjust the angle. But we can also adjust that. So you can see the line, that green line that comes all the way down straight. If we move it left or right, we're adjusting the fall off of the shadow. Like so. Now there's another lighting type in here that you don't see, and that's called IES lighting. These lights are actually real world light profiles. So say like the light bulb in your house. I can actually download that available data and load it in here and use those real world lights in this scene. So your GE light bulbs or any light bulbs you pick up at Home Depot or the grocery store, they have profiles. And I can download all that data in here and load it in and light it up as if it were a real world scene and use those lighting profiles. Very, very helpful when I'm doing interiors. So let's delete the light. And we'll get rid of all the other lights for now. That way we can kind of concentrate. Next part is going to be the spotlight. Is lighting with geometry. And you kind of get that already from the car. So when we have our red light, put that at 1. The headlight, let's see. You can see how that kind of emits a little bit from here. Now I use geometry a lot to add deflection panels, so I can bounce light, or to actually emit light, or control where I want something to reflect. So if I'm using, let's say, a plane, and I want to create an emission, and that's what our light is. So where it says principle, we'll use emission. And now you see how that brought in some light. I'll scale this. And then we can adjust the intensity. And you can see how we start to actually light the car. So what I'll do is, let me make sure everything's on here. Okay. And what I'll do generally is I'll scale it one way, lengthen it the other, and then what I'll do is I'll position it in certain places to add reflections. And I'll generally use this in combination with a low-level world lighting. So I take this, so I bump it up, and add just a little bit of light to it. And then what I'll do is I'll just simply rotate this. And you see how I get a little bit of fall off depending on where I'm at here. Actually, let me split this window so you can see it a little bit better. So let's say this here. And now this, I want to move this light to where I can control the highlight. So now you see I'm highlighting the fenders. You see I'm putting a highlight on the edge of these lights, a small highlight on the window, and I'll bring this up just a little bit. And then what I'll do is I'll duplicate this. I'll rotate this back, and I'll actually make it a little bit wider. And then what I'll do is I'll bring it this way. And now I've got a light that goes across. I might bring this up for a little less intensity. And really where this plays out is if you use cycles and not EV. So I can show you that. So Blender has two different rendering engines. There's cycles and there's EV. So for most of our work that we do here together, we're using EV because it's fast, doesn't require a lot of horsepower. And it generally gives us pretty good results. But sometimes if we want a better look, a more realistic look, we'll use cycles. So now you can see, like if I turn this all the way down, I don't even have to use the world lighting. This is strictly from the geometry. And now you see I've got nice shadows. I've got nice highlights that are falling off the vehicle. And then what I can do is say like these wheels are rather flat and gray. And now I can come in and I can adjust the reflections. So if I want, say, chrome wheels, oh, and I did that to the tire. Oops. But we can do that to the actual metal here. And we can start playing with all these different properties. Same thing, so the body, we have rather soft reflections on these. So we might want to bump down this roughness just a little bit. Yes, and we can actually soften that or sharpen that reflection a little more to give it a little bit more definition. And say for the windows, that's a pretty harsh reflection there. So you might want to bump up the roughness or bring it down, however you want it to look. And then I'll bump down the reflection just a little bit just to soften that. And then I'll bring this windows down. And that's kind of lighting in a nutshell. Now, if I want to light this with the lights, so let's hide these. And now here we are back to our base. And what I'll do is I'll add area lights because what I want to do is I want to only focus on the car. So I'll add lights, like an area light. I'll bring this up just a little bit. And I might like this one a little bit differently this time. So I scale it up. Like so. I'll bring up that intensity just oh so slightly. And now you can see how I'm getting highlights in certain places. You can see the reflection isn't as intense as where I'm using the geometry. And now what I'll do is I'll duplicate this. I'm going to rotate this to the side, say 90 degrees, or not quite 90. And I'm going to bring this here. And now I've lit the side up just a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this so I can see the front, get the front some lighting also. And then what I'll do is I'll use this in conjunction with the world lighting. And I'll bump this up. So now I've got all my highlights. I've got highlights in the window, soft reflections going. And it kind of gives you, a more realistic look. And then what we can do on top of that is we can start to add other things to the geometry or to the texture, and we can add blemishes such as rust, scratches, dents, and all sorts of things with texturing to make it more realistic. So the next thing we want to do is we want to look at our camera. And camera plays a lot in making things feel realistic. So we'll do things like adding motion blur or depth of field. And where depth of field comes in, we're talking about photography terms like we had started in the first two classes. So we're talking about f-stop. We're talking about focal distance. So if I have my camera, which I think I should have here, and we'll focus that. So if I take this camera, and let's say I only want to focus in on, say, part of the car. So I'll come over here. I'll bring this to the side like this. I'll bring it down. So say we're only focusing in on, say, just the wheel of the car, or maybe the three. You can focus in on the three. But what we want to do is we want to blur out the rest of the car. This is using depth of field. And what I'll do is I'll turn this on. We'll go into the workbench mode, and we'll turn on depth of field. Now you can see how that instantly got blurry. There's a couple of ways we can handle depth of field. So I have a camera, and what I have to do in order to do it properly is I have to know the distance from this point to the three. Or what I can do is I can create an object to focus on. So if I create an object, we'll have a plane and we'll call it focus. What we're going to do is we're going to parent it to the camera. And now what I'm going to do is when I go to the camera, and in the camera settings, where I focus object, I'm going to choose the object focus. Now you can see how everything got blurry. That's because that is at the point where the camera is. So now if I move my focus object, things start to come into focus. And to help with that, like so. So now the 3 is in focus, everything's out of focus. And part of that isn't just because that point is there. Part of that is because our f-stop, in other words, how much light is coming into our camera, is set very low. So if I increase this, you'll see things become more in focus. Whereas if I decrease this number, which means I'm letting in light faster, so I'm only going to focus in on what's in front of me. And that helps us adjust our focus. And it gives us depth of field and a much more realistic look. Now, when we're talking about aperture, which is obviously f-stop, but the blades, in other words, whenever you take a picture, you'll get a lot of dots if you have a lot of things, and if you have something in focus and everything out of focus. That's called bokeh. And the quality of that depends on how many blades we have in our real-world lens. So if I have an 8-bladed lens, it's a much more circular effect. And then we can adjust the rotation of those blades just a little bit, like 35 degrees, and that'll give us an even more customized effect. Any questions so far? Yes, I will put this in Google Classroom. Okay. See, you guys are having a little bit of difficulties. That's all right. We'll get this all posted tonight. Sorry I didn't post it last week. I've been under the weather, but we will get this posted today. So now that we have our focal distance here in play, it gives us a much more realistic look, and it allows us to play with, our scenes, how we adjust focus. So if I'm here with my camera, and let's do a small animation to start off with. We'll start back here. Say we put the wheel in focus. We'll keyframe this. We'll take the camera. Let me get rid of this old keyframe here. We'll come to, let me see. We'll come to say frame 100. We're going to pull this back. We're going to keyframe this. And then we're going to bring our focal distance in. That way we can focus, say, like on the front wheel. So as we're pulling back, we're focusing from back to front. So now when we animate, you'll see the wheel is in focus, the 3 is slightly out of focus. Now 3 is in focus, goes out of focus to the wheel. So this is how we generally create our product shots. So that's kind of the basics of lighting, some basics for camera. And then what we'll also do is we'll also take this and we'll rotate this 360. That way we have, to add some interest. So we come over here, 50. And it's like it's at a car show. And now you've got a scene that's it's lit up. Everything's going. And this is generally how we do product photography, product shots in the real world. So whenever a client gives me something that they only need to show off just a little bit, not a lot in great detail, this is kind of how we'll do it. It'll allow them to view the entire product. They'll get an idea for how it looks. As someone is explaining to them the features and benefits of, what said product. In a nutshell, that's kind of lighting and camera work at a very basic level. There's a lot of other things we can do, like with cameras. We can adjust the focal length so we can come from wide. That'll be better if you can see here. So we can simulate different types of lenses. So we can adjust, say, a really wide lens, or we can go with like a telephoto lens. So we can zoom in and out. We can shift the lenses different ways, and we can give it what's called a tilt shift effect. When we make things look miniaturized. Or we can also do is we can cut away the perspective. That way, everything kind of looks the same. Just this clipping distance. We'll fix that geometry issue. But this is for if you want to have something that doesn't have perspective. So if you want to create what's called an orthographic view. And then you have panoramic. So that doesn't show up unless you are actually rendering. And what that allows us to do is that allows us to actually render out everything around. So we're rendering out not just what's in front of us, but everything that's to this either side and behind us. So if we want to create a scene, to light a scene, this is how we would do it. Or what we can do is we can create what's called a 3D animation. And then it's not the kind where you create glasses, but it's the kind where, say if you have a camera and I have a 3D animation, what happens is I can do a walkthrough of that animation, and if you move your camera left or right, you will actually see what is to the left or to the right of you. So say if I'm doing a walkthrough of, say, St. Ambrose, and you're walking through the school, and as you're walking, I tell you, okay, turn your camera to the left, and you'll see what's going on to the left of you in camera. There might not be anything going on anywhere else, but you can have multiple animation. It allows for a lot more creativity and interactivity as you're running through. And then I think that's going to cover a good bit of it for the most part. I don't want to get too far in depth in here. So any other questions so far? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and end it for now. Next week, we're going to actually start. We're going to start building the church, building the school, adding trees and such, and really start to build up this scene in animation. And then we're going to start making frames. And that's going to allow us to edit and create an overall animation. Okay? All right, everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you next week, and I will post this tonight. Bye.